So what do you want to talk about with this banter?
Okay, I'm going to have to cut that part out. I was going to say the last stuff that I said that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the Iliad with Ken Hite. We're going to talk about snake people.
Okay. Aren't we just going to talk about snake people in this episode? People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos, 901. Edited by Daniel Spitzer. Audio by Sara and Daniel Spitzer. Music by Kevin MacLeod. Help the show by sharing, rating, liking, or 5-star giving wherever you listen to or rate podcasts. Support the show by hitting the Patreon button on pgttcm.podbean.com or by going to paypal.me/pgttcm. Buy a cool shirt from pgttcm.threadless.com. PGTTCM is part of the Dark Myths Collective. Learn more at darkmyths.org, and don't forget to visit pgttcm.com.
Yig and the Serpent People.
So it's been a while since we've been in the studio.
I know, it's a whole new studio.
I know, it's like in a different state.
Yes.
It's downstairs. It's in a basement.
Yeah.
It doesn't have a bed in it.
No.
It doesn't. This is the first studio I've been in a while. It doesn't have a bed in it.
What's crazy, of course, is that this is like a dedicated studio space.
Yeah.
Rather than being just like the microphones are hooked up to something that you also use for everything else.
Yeah.
I mean, we used to record in the kitchen sometimes, and that didn't have a bed in it.
No, it didn't. It did not. And this is kind of like a kitchen because there is an oven down here.
That's true.
And there is a sink and a refrigerator full of beer.
Oh, full of beer.
Yeah, there's probably about a good 7 gallons of beer in there.
Yeah.
So that's a benefit if anyone's an expert who wants to be on the show.
That's right. There's some homemade beer here for you.
There's tons of beer here.
Come over and have a liter.
Yes. Yes. So, yes, Badger's Drift Studio, that's us.
Yeah, we're changing the name from No Studio to
studio
an
name,
actual space because we've got an actual space for it.
Black Clock Audio Tales stays Black Clock Audio Tales. People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos is People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos, but it will be produced at
Badger's Drift Studios.
Yep. So hey, that's some news, and you can still be a patron on the patron page at pgttcm.podbean.com.
Yes, please go there and check us out, and
you can. So it's been a while since, and you can find us on Facebook at People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos, and on Facebook at Black Clock Audio Tales, and on Instagram at Black Clock Audio Tales.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That's great. And then people can get a hold of us whenever they want.
Yep. And if they check for PGTTCM on Threadless, guess what? There's t-shirts.
Really pretty t-shirts. I think I mentioned that in the intro.
Yeah. Yeah, you did.
Yeah, I did.
Anyway, but that's just where we're at currently.
Yeah.
Season 9.
Let me tell you about those t-shirts. Okay, so first of all, I have a hoodie for the show, and it is so comfortable, and it feels so nice. It's soft on the inside, and it's got nice big pockets, and of course you get to wear our logo right on your chest, which looks amazing. Yeah. They're all designed by DB himself.
Yep. There's a whole bunch of different shirts you can get, and enough of this ad. We're going to be talking about some snake men, snake people, serpent people. Yig.
Yeah.
We're also going to be
Father
talking about
Serpents.
Father of Serpents. Orrin Gray, Never Bet the Devil in Other Warnings.
It's a beautiful book.
Yeah, it is such a cool book by Strix Publishing out of Seattle. I met them at the H.P. Lovecraft and Cthulhu Con.
Yes, the one that's here in Portland.
And they were kind enough to give me a copy. And I've been reading it lately, and it's so awesome that I just had to tell you all about it. Mm-hmm. And it is a gorgeous, gorgeous book. So
it really is. It's going to look great on your bookshelf.
Oh, yeah. Look for it online. Probably find it at Strix Publishing and probably somewhere on Amazon. And if it's on Amazon, it's the cover that's gold and red. And looks
so
super
pretty.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like redesigning my bookshelves around it.
And you can find us. And also, don't forget that Black Clock Audio Tales last month, we covered the Iliad and Homeric poems.
Oh my gosh, yes. It was amazing. And Ken Hite came and talked to us about that, which was really great, too.
Came and talked to us about the classical Greek period of literature, and also talked to us about Hellenistic period. He's got a Hellenistic D&D coming out. Kickstarter coming up soon, and we'll make sure we keep you updated on that. If you like the Dungeons and Dragons, you might also like this.
Yeah, Hellenistic period of Greek culture is really cool, and it's like, man, it's what I thought Greece was like before I was more knowledgeable about the world and realized that Greece was like a modern country. Yeah.
Greece is stuff. We've got that coming up, or that just happened with Iliad and all that fun stuff. And so we've got also in the can all ready to go for when we cover Jason and the Argonauts.
That'll be fun.
Yeah.
I love those stories.
Those are pretty good ones.
Yeah.
And let's see, what else have we got going on? We've got a whole backlog of Black Clock Audio Tales connected with the old readings from People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos that you know and love so much. And of course, we are also going to have Dave from Dave's Corner of the Universe going more in depth about Serpent People than I think I could, but that's Dave's Corner of the Universe. So
yes.
We'll be talking to Dave in a little bit, and yeah, welcome back to People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos, Season 9, Episode 1.
Big Bang, 225 million years ago.
Big Bang, 225 million years ago.
15 billion years ago, the universe is created in the Big Bang. According to some, Azathoth may be responsible for this.
4.5 billion years ago, the planet Earth forms. Cthulhu and its fire vampires arrive on the Earth as it cools.
3.8 billion years ago, shortly after the rise of Earth and life, Tsathoggua arrives. He settles in the dark Gulf of Nakai.
3 billion years ago, one of the Yakubian cubes lands on the planet near the center of the Milky Way galaxy.
2 billion years ago, Chanarfan incarnates in a primitive form on Earth. It evolves itself over the coming millennia.
1 billion years ago, the Elder Things arrive on Earth. They land in the Atlantic Ocean and found their first city there. The Elder Things create the Proto-Shoggoth, which in turn produces other creatures that act as servitors and food.
900 million years ago. By this time, Elder Things cities have spread across the oceans of Earth.
800 million years ago. The Elder Things adapt to land. Many remain in the oceans, however.
750 million years ago, the flying polyps arrive on Earth and build their basalt towers on the land. They try to expand into the oceans, sparking a bitter war with the Elder Things. Eventually, the Elder Things are victorious.
450 million years ago, Elder Thing experiments lead to the first vertebrates, fish, which they permit to evolve.
400 million years ago, the great race of Yith, fleeing catastrophe on their homeworld, transmit their minds into a race of cone-shaped creatures on Earth. They drive the flying polyps underground and imprison them there. Following that war, they build their first and greatest city, Nikotis, in modern-day Australia. Nikotis.
370 million years ago, amphibians arise on Earth. Chanarfan later creates the Miri Nagri from amphibian flesh as a
350 million years ago, a cataclysm raises numerous land masses, such as Panap and R'lyeh. The disaster also destroys several marine elder thing cities. Cthulhu and his kin arrive from the star Zoth and settle on the newly risen land masses.
The Elder Things war with Cthulhu, but they eventually make peace. Cthulhu is permitted to keep his current surface territories, and the Elder Things keep the rest of the planet.
The Deep Ones enter the service of Cthulhu and help build the city of R'lyeh.
According to legend, the foundation of the underground civilization of Kenyan dates back to this time.
300 million years ago, a cosmic cataclysm, possibly a certain configuration of the stars, possibly a war with the elder gods occurs, resulting in R'lyeh sinking beneath the waves. Cthulhu is imprisoned within the city.
In all likelihood, other great old ones are imprisoned around the same time. Reptiles arise on Earth, Yig allegedly involved in their creation.
275 million years ago, the Serpent People arise and found the kingdom of Valusia.
25 million years ago, Shoggoths rebel against the Elder Things, but are defeated. But that's for later.
225 million years ago, the dinosaurs arise and destroy the Serpent People civilization. Those that survive go into hiding.
These walls, after about a mile of steep ascent, ended with a pair of vast niches, one on each side, in which monstrous nitrate-encrusted images of Yig and Cthulhu squatted, glaring at each other across the passage as they had glared since the earliest youth of the human world. The Mound, by H.P. Lovecraft and Zelia Bishop.
Yig, the father of serpents, is a deity in H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu Mythos. He first appeared in the story The Curse of Yig, which was created by Zelia Bishop and almost completely rewritten by Lovecraft. In this story, he is described as shapen like a man, except ye look at him clost. According to Lovecraft, one of Yig's main characteristics is his devotion to snakes, his children. He punishes those that harm them by turning them into spotted snakes.
It seems that Yig, the snake god of the Central Plain tribes, presumably the primal source of the most southern man, was Kukulkan, was an odd half-anthropomorphic devil of highly arbitrary and capricious nature. He was not wholly evil, but was usually quite well disposed towards those who gave their proper respect towards him and his children.
The serpents.
Yeah. The serpents. But in the autumn he became abnormally ravenous and had to be driven away by means of suitable right. That was why the tom-toms in the Pawnee, Wichita, and Caddo County pounded ceaselessly week in and week out in August, September, and October, and why the medicine made strange noises with rattles and whistles, curiously like those of the Aztecs and the Mayans. The Curse of Yig by H.P. Lovecraft and Zelia Bishop.
To Native Americans in Lovecraft's stories, Yig is regarded as bad medicine. According to Lovecraft's story, Yig is also alluded to in Western American folklore. He is identified with the Mesoamerican deity Quetzalcoatl, and in the story may be a prototype for that god and other serpentine gods worldwide. Some authors identify him as the Stygian serpent god Set from Robert E. Howard's Conan stories, and also with the great serpent worshipped by the Serpent Men of Valusia from Howard's Kull stories. Serpent Men are a fictional race created by Robert E. Howard for his King Kull tales. They first appeared in The Shadow Kingdom, published in Weird Tales in August 1929.
In Robert E. Howard's Kull stories, the Serpent People worship a god known as the Great Serpent. Later writers would identify the Great Serpent as the Great Old One Yig, and with the Stygian serpent god Set from Howard's Conan stories.
The Serpent Men were created untold eons ago by the Great Serpent. At some point, the Serpent Men had a cultural split, with one group becoming the man-serpents. One man-serpent is the titular being in the Conan story, the god in the bowl.
The seat of the first empire of the Serpent People during the Paleozoic era is Volusia. Volusia is a fictional country in the Cole stories of Robert E. Howard, and among other things of the Serpent People trying to conquer the world once again. Around 20,000 years ago, where Cole from Atlantis resigned over the Volusian kingdom located on the west coast of the main continent of Thuria.
The ancient Serpent Empire was based on sorcery and alchemy, but collapsed with the rise of the dinosaurs about 225 million years ago during the Triassic era. The Serpent Men originally ruled over humans in Volusia, but were defeated and almost wiped out in humanity's battle for survival against the Elder Things, which predated them. Over time, humans dominated Volusia, and the Serpent Men became a legend. The Serpent Men, one of the few surviving Elder Things, infiltrated human society and ruled from behind the scenes for a time, but were again discovered, defeated, and cast out in a secret war. In this case, Elder Things refers to snake people and not to the beings that created the Shoggoths.
However, they later repeated this tactic. Soon they added the front of a snake cult religion, which added power and influence within Volusia, while the Serpent People used their abilities to disguise use their abilities of disguise to murder or replace each reigning monarch. The power is eventually broken by King Kull, formerly an Atlantean barbarian who had recently conquered Volusia, and the Pict Brule, the Spear Slayer, whose society was aware of the Serpent Men's infiltration.
After the destruction of Volusia, the Serpent Men escaped to Yoth, a cavern beneath the Kinyan in North America, ironically the Pictic Isles of the Cole stories. They built subterranean cities of which only ruins remain in the modern age.
Explorers from Kinyan visited Yoth frequently to learn more of the Serpent Men's scientific lore. Their next downfall came when they brought the idols of Sathagwa from Nakai and abandoned their patron deity Yig to worship their new god. As retribution, Yig placed one of his curses upon them and forced the few remaining worshippers to flee into a series of caverns beneath Mount Vormith Adreth.
Serpent Men are humanoids with scaled skin and snake-like heads. They possess magical abilities, the most common of which is the use of illusion to disguise themselves as a human. In some stories, the ghost of someone killed by a Serpent Man becomes the Serpent Man's slave. Due to the shape of their mouths, Serpent Men cannot utter the phrase Ka Nama Ka Leherma. Howard's character Kull uses the phrase as a shibboleth in the story The Shadow Kingdom.
Up next, Dave talks more deeply about the Serpent People in Orrin Gray's Never Bet the Devil and Other Stories.
My name is David Heath, and I run a blog called Dave's Corner of the Universe. Today I've been asked to talk about two of my favorite subjects, Robert E. Howard and Serpent Men. How much do I love Robert E. Howard? Well, in my family, every year we have themed holidays. So we have Celtic Christmas, Steampunk Christmas, Minecraft Thanksgiving. Well, last year I was in charge of picking the theme, and we had Robert E. Howard Christmas. We had, instead of a traditional Christmas tree, we had a tree of woe. We had a stocking with Robert E. Howard's picture on it. We even had Robert E. Howard themed presents. So Two Gun Bob is something that we take pretty serious in this neck of the woods. Now, what many listeners may find surprising is that the Serpent Men were not created for Robert E. Howard's most popular character, Conan the Barbarian. In fact, they appeared in a predecessor of Conan in King Cole, which was, now people would come after Howard's death and retroactively add in Serpent Men into Conan stories, but the Serpent Men never appeared in any Conan stories. They appear in the King Cole series, Cole of Atlantis. These were written in 1929. There are only 3 Cole of Atlantis stories written by Robert E. Howard. Some of his half-written stories he would later turn into Conan the Barbarian stories. Later writers would come in, comic book writers would add to the Cole canon, but there are only 3 actual source material written by Robert E. Howard. One thing you have to remember about Howard is that, unlike his friend and correspondent H.P. Lovecraft, Lovecraft focused mainly on Gothic horror. He did swerve out of his lane to write some fantasy stories in his Dreamland stories for a while. But unlike Lovecraft, Howard wrote all kinds of stories. He wrote classic horror stories like The Thing on the Roof or The Black Stone. He wrote very traditional pulp, sort of prototype Indiana Jones stories. He wrote boxing stories. Right before he died, he was finally settling down writing westerns, traditional westerns, which were of his people, the people of Texas, that he really seemed to be happy with. But before he wrote or invented practically high sword and sorcery stories with Conan, he wrote many historical adventures, historical fiction. Now, the emphasis is going to be on fiction rather than history. So in the Cole stories, it sets place in Atlantis 10,000 years before Christ, in which is basically a Iron Age society that never existed at the time. Many people see Cole as a low-rent Conan. In fact, Conan is going to start as an attempt to overcome writer's block. Robert E. Howard is going to he's going to go through a serious writer's block. And so he starts setting out Conan and his world as an attempt to overcome that. As such, several unfinished Cole stories are going to be recycled into Conan the Barbarian stories. So Howard at least saw Cole as the spiritual predecessor of Conan. In fact, Hollywood is going to treat the two properties almost as if they are exactly the same. In the Arnold Schwarzenegger Conan the Barbarian movie, the main antagonist, Vessel of Doom was not a Conan character, but was actually a character taken from the Cole stories. The same thing with the Serpent cult that follows him. These don't come from original canon Conan stories. They are from King Cole. In 1997, they're going to make a Cole movie, and it's going to have star Kevin Sorbo of Hercules fame. And its actually plot is going to come from a Conan short story called The Hour of the Dragon. So these two characters are basically thrown into a blender by Hollywood, and different parts are pulled out, different plots. So as far as Hollywood is concerned, they really are the two sides of the same coin. It just depends on whose copyright or trademark do you have to make your product. But in Robert E. Howard's mind, these were two separate characters separated by 8,000 years of history. Howard wrote copious notes when he was creating Conan's world. Now, in these notes, he says that the Atlantis occult did exist, so they do exist on the same world. And it's possible that that Serpent Men existed in Conan's time, and that he just didn't encounter them, or that Howard just didn't tell that story. That way, you can sort of take stories by later writers where the Serpent Men did exist, or were main antagonists, and safely put them in the Conan canon. Though Howard never wrote any Conan stories with Serpent Men, he definitely didn't create a world where it couldn't happen. So even though there are 3 Cole stories, there are only one where the Serpent Men appear, and that is the Shadow Kingdom. And to me, that just shows the power of this concept of this man-serpent creature, that it stretches throughout this genre of sorcery and magic, but it originated in one story. I think it's quite possible that Robert E. Howard himself may have misunderstood or not recognized the full impact that these Serpent Men would have on readers and future readers, and that they may have almost been throwaway antagonists. But something primal in the human brain, the reptile portion of the human brain, if you will, just connects to this antagonistic race, that it has lasted so long in so many different forms, even though they very, very well may have been throwaway characters as far as Robert E. Howard was concerned. So these creatures are bipedal. They have a head, 2 arms, 2 legs, and they are serpentine. They have scales, long tongues. They are from a race that predates human beings. So remember, in Howard's timeline, we have Iron Age societies that are destroyed 20,000 years before the birth of Jesus Christ. So human society is much older than it may have been in reality. So he has pre-human societies that coexist during the time of the dinosaurs. Howard is going to have this great cataclysm that is basically going to force the Serpent Men underground to survive. And they are going to survive as small colonies, that when they come back to the surface, this mammalian humans are in control, and that these humans have stolen their land. And they cannot necessarily, because so few have survived, they cannot necessarily beat the humans in a full-scale war. So they're going to use their magic, their science, their trickery, their ability to disguise themselves as human beings in a shadow war. But since Robert E. Howard only wrote one serpent person story, we don't get a lot of background from him. I'm going to backtrack a little bit on my statement that there is only one Serpent People story by Robert E. Howard. They do appear in a story about the Irish pirate Cormac MacArt, who has a bunch of Viking crewmen. And in the Temple of the Abomination, they appears to be the last of the Serpent Men. Now, the thing is, in the Temple of Abomination was started by Robert E. Howard, but never published in his lifetime. And it is at least edited by Richard L. Tierney. In fact, maybe a lot of it is ghost written. I personally do not know how much of that story was Howard's and how much of that was Tierney's. I'm not saying it's not a good story. It is. I'm just not sure if it's something, how much of the Lizard Men idea Howard wanted to go with. Especially since most of the Cormac MacArt stories, all the others, they don't involve supernatural beings. They're just pirates fighting other people. So it's definitely a change in the writings of Howard for his Cormac stories. And the other thing is, it isn't going to be published for another 30 years after Robert E. Howard dies. So to me, at least in my heart, the Temple of the Abomination is more of a Tierney story than a Howard story. That may not be true in an actual writing sense, but in my heart I see that's more of a Tierney story than a Robert E. Howard story. In 1975, almost 40 years after Howard's death, L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter are writing Conan stories. And they have to sort of out Howard. So they have Conan and his teenage son, Con. They're traveling, chasing after a wizard, and they come across an entire colony of female lizard people. And in this story, Conan's teenage son is going to go off and have an affair with one of the lizard women, and he sees her reflection in a shield and realizes who she is. So there's a great war, and the lizard women are all destroyed. Now, this does put lizard men, or lizard women in this case, in the Conan canon. But again, this is written 40 years after Howard died. In the 1970s, Marvel acquires the right to almost all of Robert E. Howard's property. Their big published Howard property, of course, is going to be Conan the Barbarian, and there's going to be some classic comic book adventures coming from this time. We see that they modify Howard's Red Sonja to become the red-headed, fiery, bikini armor-clad warrior that we all love today. But they also published in these other Howard stories. So we have Solomon Kane comics, and we have King Cole comics. And in 1971, they're going to publish Cole Adventures with the Serpent Men. Now, comic book crossovers are pretty common, and they were in the 70s. But we have, of all things, a Spider-Man crossover we have with the Howard titles. At one time, Mary Jane is overcome with the memories of Red Sonja. Maybe she was even the reincarnation of Red Sonja. And another one, Spider-Man actually experiences the ghost of King Cole and ends up fighting Serpent Men. He comes across the Defenders, which have Doctor Strange at the time, several other heroes, and they're actually Serpent Men in disguise as the Defenders. And the way that Peter Parker reveals them as Serpent Men is the same way that Cole did in the original Robert E. Howard story. Even though they have the illusion of appearing human beings, serpent people have the same physiology. Their appearance as human beings is just that, it's an illusion. So their mouths, their jaws, their tongues are physically the same, they just look like a human being. So there are certain sounds they cannot pronounce with the way their face is designed. And Cole and Peter Parker basically get them to say or try to say something they cannot say. This reveals them to be serpent people in disguises. So the Defenders that at this time include Doctor Strange, the Hulk, Namor, have been captured by the Serpent Men, and they need to be rescued by Spider-Man, which of course he does. After this, the Serpent Men are banished into limbo by Doctor Strange. So these are very Robert E. Howard, very traditional pulp Serpent Men who appear in Marvel canon. The Serpent Men, as created by Robert E. Howard, are part of Marvel's 616 universe, the main universe that the comic books are based on. So there is definitely a direct tie from Robert E. Howard and the Marvel Serpent Men. However, serpents, or humanoid serpents, are going to become very common in science fiction, fantasy from the 1970s on. And we're going to see that, as a child, my favorite part of The Land of the Lost were these slee stacks. The visitors from V, these are reptiles with masks. We have Bosk, the bounty hunter from Star Wars. We have the Gorn from Star Trek. Now, these are going to be part of pop culture, and they're going to be burned pretty deep into, but I have no way of knowing if these examples were inspired by Robert E. Howard or not. To best of my knowledge, there is no acknowledged correlation to these characters and Robert E. Howard. One of the most famous serpent-like humanoids in science fiction is going to be the Ceruleans in Doctor Who. And even though there is no official acknowledgement that they were inspired by Robert E. Howard, I think the case is a little bit stronger. Ceruleans first appeared in 1970 during a part of the Third Doctor, where the Third Doctor TARDIS was deactivated by the Time Lords. So the 1970-71 series centered on the Earth, with threats coming to Earth, either by mad scientists or out of space. The Ceruleans were a little bit different in the fact that they were, like Robert E. Howard's Serpent Men, a pre-Earth civilization that went underground because of a great cataclysm. Now, in Robert E. Howard's writing, he just says, no, it was a cataclysm. He never explains it. In the Doctor Who episode, it is that the Cerulean scientists detected a giant asteroid that they thought was going to collide with the Earth. And so they went underground and hibernated. In reality, this giant asteroid became the moon and caught in a sort of a dual orbit with the Earth. So we see a connection with Howard's Serpent Men and Doctor Who's Ceruleans. The other sort of pre-humanoid race that we see in Doctor Who is the Sea Devils, which are very analogous to H.P. Lovecraft's the deep ones. So I think that there can be a strong argument made, even though it's never been officially admitted to, that the Ceruleans are at least inspired by Robert E. Howard. And one thing that I think that sort of cemented this whole sort of Serpent Man as a antagonist to the human race in pop culture is Dungeons and Dragons. I think it is almost impossible to understate the importance that Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games in general had on the evolution of pop culture in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. This sort of introduced fantasy, creativity in some ways, and nerd culture to a wider audience. And one of the more common villains in the game were the Lizard Men. These were based quite clearly on Robert E. Howard's Serpent Men. I think Gary Gygax and the other pioneers of Dungeons and Dragons are very open about how Cole and Conan stories influenced them and the game. Now, these are 2 hit dice villains. They're basically cannon fodder. And so this means people who played the game maybe 3 or 4 times and quit were still exposed to the concept of Serpent Men and Lizard Men and reptilian society as this opponent to medieval human beings. So we see how Howard has influenced pop culture with his Serpent Men, but let's see what are some things that might have influenced Howard. Personally, I think that Howard was inspired by the occultist and theosophist Madame Blavatsky. We definitely know that Howard and Lovecraft were aware of the writings of Blavatsky. Lovecraft writes letters saying, he thinks that theosophy is this silly, sort of simple-minded concept, but it's a great source for fiction. Howard, in his King Cole stories, has a Lemurians, which are different than the Lemurians Madame Blavatsky uses, but he definitely uses the term, so we know he is familiar with the concept. Lemuria is often seen as sort of another example of Atlantis, but its origins are actually quite intriguing. In the mid to late 19th century, biologists were confronted with the fact that there appears to be lemurs in India and Madagascar. And they could not figure out how did a creature that was separated by such a large space of ocean basically evolve or come into 2 different places. Now, with modern genetics, we see that the lemurs of Madagascar and the lemurs of India look alike physically, but genetically they're completely different creatures. So early, Darwinists and evolutionists didn't know that. So they had to come up with a reason why the 2 creatures might coexist in 2 areas separated by this large body of water. And they postulated that there was at one time an island in the middle of the 2, which they called, after lemurs, Lemuria. And that the Lemurias got the lemurs got from Madagascar to Lemuria to India or vice versa, and then the island sunk. It is a classic case of a scientist's theory getting a hole stuck in it, and they're coming up with any explanation they can to plug this up. Madame Blavatsky gets this theory, and she basically runs it through an occult ringer. She basically says that Lemuria was a true island that sank, but it was populated not by lemurs, but by a pre-human reptilian race, which she called the Lemurians. These Lemurians were large, reptilian, very innocent-like creatures that were destroyed by the universe. Because of their innocence, they ended up having carnal relationships with animals. Now, Blavatsky basically takes shot in the dark scientific theory and adds high weirdness to it. Now, we do know that Howard was aware of her writings, and this was probably because of its salacious nature, one of her most published ideas. So I don't think it's a far jump to assume that Robert E. Howard was aware of this, and that even though maybe he didn't have it consciously in his mind when he was creating the Serpent People, he definitely could have been subconsciously influenced by them and the Theophist theories in general. Now, you remember that I said that the one and only Howard Lizard People story, or Serpent People story, appeared in 1929. In 1933, the Los Angeles Times ran an article about a man named Schofield. G. Warren Schofield basically claimed that the city of Los Angeles was built over lizard men tunnels, and they ran in the LA Times drawings that he made of where these tunnels ran through Los Angeles. And the Times apparently treated it as a legitimate news article. Maybe, at least in print it seemed legitimate. Maybe when they were writing it, they were, laughing and making fun of it. But Schofield's theories were published in the LA Times in 1933. Now, he claims to have gotten most of his information from Hopi, Indian, and Mayan sources in Texas, but I think it is possible that he may have been influenced by the King Cole story, possibly even subconsciously. It may have been he was aware of it and not remembered reading it. There is definitely this similarity that the reptilian creatures have gone underground, and that they live underneath thriving human society. Now, we do have a modern version of Serpent People in the theories of David Icke. I'm a tad reticent to bring this up, but he has these theories that many leaders of the United States, including or the world, Barack Obama, the Queen of England, are actually baby-eating reptile creatures. Unlike Robert E. Howard's Serpent People, these are creatures from another planet, as opposed to pre-human earthly civilizations, but that they have the leadership of the world and that they are basically disguised. And what prevents me of thinking that David Icke's theories are just good-natured, fun, high weirdness is that many people have accused him of repackaging anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic tropes and theories and replacing the concept of Jews with reptilians. And if he did, of course, that is horrid and should be condemned. But I also think maybe Ike, who just oozes high awareness at times, maybe he's subconsciously channeling Robert E. Howard and his lizard people. In 2008, lizard people, or Serpent Men, came into American politics. There was a very contested congressional seat between Al Franken and a Republican Norm Coleman, where it came down to literally every vote had to be counted. It was that close. And there was a lawsuit which included a vote that had someone had written lizard people and then voted for a candidate. And so the question was this a legitimate vote for lizard people? Now, the person who claimed to have done it says, it was a joke. It wasn't really meant to be. He didn't like any candidates, but at the last minute changed his vote to Franken. But that, he did it because of the David Icke conspiracy theories. But in my mind, I would love to think that somehow this vote for lizard people that nearly changed an American election was somehow inspired by Robert E. Howard. Again, the person who claims that he made that vote said that, he said that it was because of the David Icke theories, but still, I would love that Robert E. Howard had reached across time and 70 years after his death had changed American politics with his stories. Because I will tell you one thing. When I look at the world and I listen to the news on the radio, I really do wish that maybe Robert E. Howard was running things as opposed to the people who really are running things nowadays. And on some days, I think I'd even vote for the lizard people. This is David Heath, and again, I can be found on Dave's Corner of the Universe, and I'm grateful that you and I could have some time to talk about two of my favorite subjects, Robert E. Howard and Serpent People.
Never Bet the Devil and Other Warnings by Orrin Gray. I have the Strix Publishing Edition, which is out of Seattle, Washington. Never Bet the Devil and Other Warnings is a premium limited edition modern horror classic, first published in 2012. This collection of Orrin Gray put him on the map as an up-and-coming horror author of note. Gray has since become renowned for his voice of the genre with such works as Painted Monsters and Other Strange Beasts, and all kinds of other good ones. This new edition from Strix Publishing includes all 10 stories from the original, including the novella The Mysterious Flame, the all-new story Goblins. Never Bet the Devil and Other Warnings is 185 pages and illustrated by the brilliant M.S. Corley. The limited edition of 500 copies features a beautiful 6x9-inch cloth-bound foil-stamped cover and foreword by noted author Nathan Ballingrad. Never Bet the Devil and Other Warnings is now available $29.99 on Strix Publishing.
I don't know if there's any copies available of it. I received it from Strix, so anyway, it's a beautiful book. It really, really, really is a beautiful book, and
Gray is such a good author. Really, really good stuff. I will read you the first bit of Never Bet the Devil. Never Bet the Devil. Acquired at auction as part of a lot of items recovered from an antique circus train that was found abandoned on an unused spur near illegible Illinois. This appears to be a coin-operated entertainment in the style of the fortune-telling devices often found in penny arcades, but with an articulated devil figure behind the glass rather than the waxen gypsy or crone. The wooden figure is red-painted and holds 5 playing cards of a normal type. According to the instructions painted on the side of the cabinet, when a penny is inserted into the slot, the machine ejects 5 miniature playing cards through a chute. If these cards beat the devil's hand, the player may receive his heart's desire. The collateral being put up by the prospective player is left deliberately unclear. At the time of the cataloging, the mechanism appears to remain untested. Author's notes. I wrote this for a contest that Jeff Vandermeer was having on his website for the Thackeray T. Lambshed Cabinet of Curiosities. It didn't make it into the book, but it did get me the attention of an agent, which isn't half bad for a little 150-word snip of a thing. There are a lot of allusions packed into this one. I got the idea from those coin-operated fortune-telling machines that they used to have in penny arcades. But there's also reference to Ray Bradbury's great novel, Something Wicked This Way Comes, and the title is a nod to Poe's Never Bet the Devil Your Head. I highly recommend this book. That is just like the slice of the tip of the iceberg. Just find it used, find it new, whatever you do, track down a copy of this and enjoy Gray's just really, really, really good collection. This is one of those that you keep. This isn't one that you oh, hey, I got this at a convention and I'm going to hold on to it for a while and then you loan it out and you don't care. No, this is the one that is like, hey, you can borrow it if you sit at my kitchen table and hand it back to me when you're done. All right. Thank you very much, sir or madam. Anyway, Never Bet the Devil and Other Warnings. Pick it up, find it, make it your own. All right. Back to the show.
Next month on Black Clock Audio Tales, we will be having a whole month, the month of May, this month, Hawaiian folklore and legends.
Which sounds really fun. I really don't know much about it, so it's going to be interesting to find out. Definitely.
A whole month. I don't have any experts lined up to talk about that, but who knows what'll happen between here and the end of the month.
Mm-hmm.
And also, we've got coming into the studio soon, author Cody Goodfellow to talk about Shoggoths. Says he said, hey, I know something about Shoggoths. I've written about them. And I'm like, well, hey, come on to the show, sir.
That'll be fun.
He's going to be on the show. He's going to be down in the studio. And yeah, next episode is about Shoggoths and polyps. At least it's going to be about Shoggoths. So yeah.
And flying polyps.
Well, maybe we'll fit some flying polyps in there.
Yeah, sounds fun.
Yeah. And remember to keep it weird.
And stay squiggly.
What's that thing that I have a really hard time saying that you're supposed to say to snake people?
Hold on.
I'm sorry. Snake people is the derogative term.
Oh, what is the
Serpent people.
Oh, of course, serpent people. Ka nama ka laherama.
Yeah, I can't say that. I'm not a snake person, though. I swear up and down. Because why would a snake person say a derogatory term about themselves?
I don't know.
I don't know either.
Maybe to blend in?
Audio by D.B. Spitzer and Sarah Fee. Music, as always, by Kevin MacLeod. And remember, go to all those places that we talk about to go to check out stuff like, I don't know, pgttcm.com, pgttcm.podbean.com, Facebook, Instagram. Look for Black Clock Audio Tales and People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos on the Facebook. And remember, you can check out Black Clock Audio Tales on the YouTube. Okay, that's it. We're done. End of show.
See you next month.
See you then. If you want to hear us more than once a month, let us know, and we'll try and make that happen. But with the daily podcast, it's a little tough. But hey, thanks again for listening. And if you want to keep the show going, donate $1 or $5 so we can get better equipment and, I don't know, have snacks. All right. Bye.